first slide in every new section is functions. So, what does the nervous system do? It does a lot. It does a lot. Okay. Sensory information, and then a response. We're doing something based on that information. Okay? So we can narrow down, even though the nervous system does a lot of things, we can narrow it down to these three functions. Number one, it gathers information, so it gathers sensory input. Okay? So in our picture, we have an eye. It sees there is a glass of water on the table. That is sensory input. It is going to send that information to the central nervous system, so brain or spinal cord. Okay, step number two, we have to integrate that sensory input. That's the decision-making part of the nervous system. So that's going to happen here in the brain or spinal cord. Okay, so that's where you say, I see something. That is a glass of water. I am thirsty. I would like to grab that glass of water. Let me reach out my hand and grab that glass of water. Okay, that is happening in your integration centers right now without you even spending much time to think about it. It happens in a split second. And then step three, it causes a response or motor output. So we're going to send information back out of the central nervous system to something else. And in this case, we're sending information to your arm muscle to say, I need to contract to lift that bottle up. Okay? So three basic parts, the functions of the nervous system. Okay? Now, organization of the nervous system. So we're going to look at it on this chart. I like this chart. This is the way my brain thinks. But on the next slide is a picture. So we're going to look at it two different ways. Whichever one is better for you, use that one. Okay? But you know how we like to classify and organize things because we're anatomists, right? Okay. So the first big difference, big divisions of the nervous system are right here. The central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. Those are the two big categories. Okay? The central nervous system only contains two things, the brain and the spinal cord. That's it. That's all you got. Okay? Brain and spinal cord. The function of the central nervous system is to integrate. So that's where you're going to have decision making. It happens there in the brain and spinal cord. And it houses your control centers. So if you remember when we talked about homeostasis and those feedback loops, somewhere there has to be a set point. There has to be somewhere that says, this is my body temperature I want to get to. That's in your central nervous system. There has to be somewhere that says, this is my blood pressure that I want to be at. That's in the central nervous system. Okay? Then that means everything else is peripheral nervous system. So everything that comes off of the brain and spinal cord. So that includes cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So where do you think cranial nerves are going to originate? Where do they start out at? The brain. Okay, so hopefully you saw some of those on your sheep brain. You see your optic nerves, the optic chiasma. That's fun stuff, right? Okay, and then your spinal nerves, where do they start out at? Spinal cord, that's right. So these are things that are coming off of the central nervous system. Okay, so once we leave the brain and spinal cord, we are peripheral nervous system. Okay, so those are the two big divisions based on just anatomy. Where is it located? Okay, now before we get to our next division, I want to talk about these arrows that you got going on here. You see we've got some red arrows, and we've got some blue arrows. Red arrows are always going away from the central nervous system. Blue arrows are always going towards the central nervous system. So on this picture, if you are blue, it's going towards the central nervous system. Is that going to be afferent or efferent? Afferent. Okay. And is that going to be sensory information or motor information? What are you sending to the brain? Sensory. Okay. And then if you are red, you're going away from the brain and spinal cord, then that now is efferent, because that's going to cause an effect. And instead of sensory, it's going to be motor. Okay? So we can follow those arrows and see which direction things are going. Into the central nervous system or out of the central nervous system. I believe we talked about the difference between afferent and efferent when we looked at those homeostatic pathways, but it's those hard ones to keep track, like affect and effect. So affect comes in, effect is the effect you're sending out. You're going to effect something, okay? Cause and effect. Okay. Now, let's get back to the peripheral nervous system. We're going to separate the peripheral nervous system now into two categories, okay? And that line goes right here. So now we have sensory, or the afferent division, and motor, or the efferent division. So they are divided based on which direction the information is going. So they're both still in the periphery, but sensory division or afferent division is going to send information to the central nervous system, and the motor or efferent division is taking information out of the central nervous system. Okay? Now, the sensory or afferent division includes both somatic and visceral sensory nerve fibers. So nerve fibers from both somatic areas. Somatic is going to be skeletal muscle. Can you read that? Okay, and then visceral is going to be your other muscles and glands. So your other muscles are going to be cardiac and smooth muscles. I know that's a mess. Hopefully you understand what I'm trying to write up there. Okay. And so they're conducting impulses from receptors to the central nervous system. Okay. So that's the sensory division. Then we have the efferent or motor division. That includes motor nerve fibers. Okay, and those motor nerve fibers are going to conduct impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors, which are the muscles and glands. Okay. With me still? Now, yeah, this one's supposed to be skeletal muscle. This one's cardiac and smooth. Okay, so now we're going to take the motor division, sending information out, and we are going to divide it even further depending on where the information is going. Okay, so we have the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system only goes to voluntary motor nerve fibers, so this is going to skeletal muscle. Okay. That's an SK again for skeletal. Okay, so somatic nervous system goes to skeletal muscle. It conducts impulses from the central nervous system. Okay. And so what we have left is the autonomic nervous system. And it includes your visceral motor nerve fibers, and it conducts information to cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. Okay? But both of them, because we are taking information out of the central nervous system, are still considered efferent nerves, motor nerves. Okay. Now, the autonomic nervous system can again be split into two categories. Just because, that's what we do. Okay, so the autonomic nervous system can be separated into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic divisions. Okay? The sympathetic division is your fight or flight. It has sympathy on you when you are in trouble and is trying to help you out. So we're going to write under here, fight or flight. Okay, fight or flight. Then the parasympathetic is going to be rest and digest. So So when we're looking at these visceral motor fibers, we're going to things like cardiac muscle. So your heart is going to be innervated with both sympathetic nerves and parasympathetic nerves. So both are going to the same organ. What is the sympathetic nervous system going to tell your heart to do if it's telling it to fight or flight? It's going to increase, right? Because when you run away, you need your heart to beat faster, okay? The parasympathetic, when it fires, it's going to tell your heart to calm down. It's okay. You're all right. You just need to chill. Okay? So both of those will go to the same organ. All right. So that's one way to look at it in a diagram. Now let's look at a picture. I'll have you guys help me label these things. Okay, so a little bit different way of looking at it, but it's the same type of information. So first we have our brain and spinal cord. What's that called? Central nervous system. Good. And then all of these fibers coming off of them, the blue and the red over here, that is your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so those are things that are coming off of your brain and spinal cord. Red is still going away from the central nervous system. Blue is still going towards the sensory nervous system, or towards the central nervous system. Okay, so the blue, since they're carrying information towards the brain, what type of fibers are they? Sensory fibers. Okay, this one is going to the skeletal muscle here. Let's see. It looks like it's hard to see, but we'll call that the erector pili muscle, the muscle in your skin that contracts and holds the hair up. Okay, since it's going to that, it's called a somatic sensory fiber. But this sensory fiber is going to the heart. So what's he called? Visceral. Okay, so visceral is cardiac smooth or glands. Okay. Then we have these red guys. They are sending information away from the central nervous system. So what are they called? Afferent motor neurons. Okay. This one down here that is going to skeletal muscle. What's he called? Somatic. Okay, so he's a somatic nervous system, a motor neuron, and a somatic nervous system. And then see the heart, he has two fibers that are connecting to him. He has this first one and the second one. Since this is a visceral organ, since it's a heart, we're part of the autonomic nervous system now. And the top one is parasympathetic, so that's going to tell the heart to calm down, chill out. The second one is the sympathetic nervous system, so that's going to cause the heart to speed up. But that heart is innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic. If we're looking at somatic nervous system, though, there's only one nerve fiber that's going to it. Okay, you don't have sympathetic and parasympathetic. You just have a motor neuron that fires and says contracts. Okay? When it stops firing, you stop contracting. Right?
So what happens to the heart when the parasympathetic and sympathetic are both telling it separately?
It depends on which one outweighs the other. So it's intensity of those action potentials. Yep. They'll find it out. Okay. Questions? Right, now it's your favorite section, histology. Because you love histology. You loved that lab at the beginning. It was your favorite one ever. Okay, so histology of nervous tissue. You are going to find primarily two types of cells there in nervous tissue. One are going to be the neurons. Everything okay?
Yes, my phone's calling 911.
Oh, nice. We can tell them about neurons too. Okay. Okay. As long as we're not getting like an emergency alert.
No.
Okay.
My phone is
Okay. So our two types of cells that we're dealing with here in nervous tissue, neurons. Neurons are the ones that are excitable. They're the ones that are actually transmitting electrical information. Okay, so they are doing those functions of the nervous system. Okay? But we also have these supporting cells, the glial cells. Okay, so their name, neuroglia, means nerve glue. So they help hold everything together and keep them functioning the way they need to. So they surround neurons, they wrap neurons, and help them do their job. Now, for a long time, it was thought that the amount of neurons you have must determine how smart you are because they're the ones that are actually sending the information. So they decided to do a little experiment. I won't call it a study because it only had one person in it. But they did a little experiment where they chose someone who they thought was really, really smart. Okay? If you had to choose one person who's dead that you thought is really, really smart, who would you choose? Einstein. Okay, so they took Einstein. And they took some slices of his brain, and they isolated out the neurons and the glial cells. And they looked at how many he had. Well, guess what? He had about the same number of neurons as a quote-unquote normal person. However, when they looked at his glial cells, he had a whole lot more glial cells than the quote-unquote normal person. So, that leads us to believe that there is more going on with these glial cells than we think. Okay? So there's still research going on in this to figure out what all these glial cells do. We have an idea for some of them, and some of them we're still trying to figure it out. Yes? Right now there isn't. But if you could figure out a way to do that, exactly. A very, very smart millionaire. Right. Okay. So, we're going to look at these glial cells first. We're going to first look at the glial cells in the central nervous system. So these are ones that are found in your brain and spinal cord. Then we'll look at the cells that are found in your peripheral nervous system. Okay, so our first guys, the astrocytes. When you see the prefix astro, what do you think of? Stars, astronomy. So these cells are star-shaped. So you see this guy over here, he's got his cell body, and then he's got all these extensions coming off of him. Okay, so let me tell you about him. He can wrap around, first of all, he's the most abundant glial cell. There's lots of them. He can wrap himself around a neuron, and he can wrap himself around a capillary, and he holds them together. That's where the nerve glue kind of comes in here. So he's holding that neuron close to the capillary. Why is that going to be helpful to the neuron? What does he get from the capillaries? What's in the blood that he needs? Energy in the form of the nutrients that are there. So like sugars are going to be found there. And he also gets oxygen. Okay? So you're holding that neuron close to the capillaries so that it can get the nutrients it needs to survive. Okay. Now, if I just told you that was the function of these astrocytes, you would say, wow, they're cool. I want to be an astrocyte. But wait, there's more. So these astrocytes also like to suck up extra potassium ions and give them back to the neurons. So these neurons are going to do action potentials similar to what we saw in our muscle cells, where we are transferring sodium and potassium. The sodium wants to go into the cell, the potassium will end up going out of the cell to balance things out. So when that potassium goes out of the cell, it's just sitting around the neurons. The astrocytes come out behind it and go, suck up that potassium. Here you go, neurons. You lost these. Cool stuff, right? But wait. There's more. These astrocytes also recycle neurotransmitters. So if you remember back again to our muscles, we had the motor neuron, somatic motor neuron, now we know, sits a little bit away from the muscle fiber, right? In order to start an in-plate potential, he releases what into that synaptic cleft? Acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter. And it binds the acetylcholine receptors, opens those channels. Okay. Once those are released, though, they kind of just float around. Astrocytes recycle neurotransmitters. So they suck up extra neurotransmitter, turn it back around, give it to the neurons so they can use it again. These guys are cool. So you can see kind of where this makes sense. The glial cells are going to be really important in keeping those neurons healthy, keeping them doing their job well, and why Einstein might have had more of these astrocytes than normal person. Cool, right? Okay, so that's our first one. The second type is one of my favorites because it's part of the immune system, and the immune system is my favorite. So these guys are called microglia. It's not that the cells themselves are small, but it's that the extensions coming off of them are smaller than the astrocytes' arms are. Okay? So skinny arms. What these microglia do is they hang out in the central nervous system, but whenever there is danger, these guys can turn into macrophages. And macrophages go out and gobble up bad things. So if there's bacteria around, he'll go and eat them up. If there is a parasite somewhere, he'll go around and eat it up. If there's a neuron that needs to be broken down, it's dead, he'll go out and eat it up. Okay? And that's important because there's something called a blood-brain barrier that we'll get to later, but blood has a problem getting to the brain. Okay? Which means that all those white blood cells that are carried in the blood don't get to the brain very easily. Okay, so the immune system is kind of walled off from the brain and spinal cord. But these guys live there, and so they can take care of the stuff that needs to be taken care of. Okay. All right, still in the central nervous system, we've got two more. We have ependymal cells and oligodendrocytes. Okay, so ependymal cells. Do you guys remember when you cut up on your sheep brain, you have ventricles. So they're the two lateral ventricles that are really big. They're big holes in your brain. And then there's the first, second, third, and fourth ventricles as well. But all of those holes in the central nervous system are covered with these ependymal cells. So it's like the epithelium of the brain, if you were to think of it like that. Okay, just a thin layer covering the openings. It also covers the central canal of the spinal cord, which is the big hole in the middle of it. And it beats cilia, so the hair is on top, it beats it to move the cerebrospinal fluid. So that's what CSF stands for. Let me see if I can write it out for you. Cerebrospinal, that's all one word, and then fluid. Okay, so cerebrospinal fluid helps form that blood-brain barrier. So the blood doesn't get to the brain. The cerebrospinal fluid is the fluid that the brain sits in. Okay? But these ependymal cells help beat their cilia, which moves the cerebrospinal fluid around, which allows nutrients to get to the cells of the brain and waste to get away. Okay? These guys can also work in the production of cerebrospinal fluid. So they also help make cerebrospinal fluid. All right. Our next one. So we're going to quickly say what these are, and then we're going to explain what that means in a little bit. Okay? So these oligodendrocytes are found in the central nervous system, so brain and spinal cord, and they are going to line up along our thicker, our bigger central nervous system neurons and wrap them with their cytoplasmic extensions. So it's going to reach out and grab and wrap around it. And this arm will reach out and grab around another axon. So you end up with what we see here. We've got a cell body, and then this extension goes over here and wraps around. He's actually going to wrap this direction. Wrap around that axon. He's wrapping around this axon. He's wrapping around this axon. And what we cover them with is insulation called myelin sheaths, which we'll come back to and talk about in a second. Okay? But the thing to remember about oligodendrocytes is, first of all, they're in the central nervous system. And the first part of his name is oligo, which means several or many. So an oligodendrocyte can wrap around several axons at the same time. Okay? All right. Questions? So those are the glial cells in the central nervous system. Now we're going out to the peripheral nervous system. We only have two types. The first type are satellite cells. Satellite cells are these purple cells that are hanging out around the cell body of a neuron. So they kind of sit around the cell body. We don't really know what they do. If The second thing, or the second type of cells in there are Schwann cells. Okay, these are the important ones. These are the ones we're going to spend a lot of time with. They surround and form the myelin sheath in the peripheral nervous system. So they're wrapping around axons out here, away from the brain and spinal cord. Okay? When you look at them, what you see is this is one axon, and we have multiple Schwann cells covering that same axon. But that one Schwann cell only covers one axon. Okay? So they sit right here. There's little gaps between them that we'll come back to in a second. And these Schwann cells are vital for nerve fiber regeneration. So if there is an injury in that nerve fiber, he is more likely to repair himself if there is a Schwann cell for him to regrow through. It kind of gives them a foundation to grow into. Okay? All right. So those are your glial cells. Now we're going to spend some time talking about neurons. Okay, ready? Okay. So neurons are the structural units of the nervous system. They're the ones that are actually conducting electricity. So they conduct messages, the nerve impulses. They are extremely long-living, so extreme longevity. The neurons that you have now are probably the same neurons you were born with. Okay, they hang around. They are also amitotic. So what is mitosis? Cell division. So you start with one cell and you end up with two. And cells do that to repair, to replace, and to grow. However, neurons are mostly amitotic. They don't do mitosis. So they don't divide to repair or replace themselves. For a long time, scientists would tell you nerve cells do not repair. Once you get some type of nerve damage, it's gone, it's dead, you're out of luck. What we're finding now, though, is there are ways to repair nervous tissue that we're finding. We've also found areas of stem cells within you that are nervous system stem cells. And research now is going in and getting those stem cells and putting them in the area where there's an injury for it to regrow and fill in the area. Okay? So, this may be true for the majority of the neurons, but we're finding that it's not true for every single one of them, which is a good thing for us. Okay? Neurons also have a high metabolic rate. They require a lot of energy. Okay? So the majority of the ATP they're producing goes to function the sodium-potassium pump. Okay? Because we're going to do all kinds of messing up with that membrane potential when we start talking about action potentials. And to get it balanced back out, we need that sodium-potassium pump. Okay? So because of this high metabolic rate, neurons require oxygen and they require glucose. So things like skeletal muscle can go for a while without oxygen. It'll switch over to fermentation and you're good. Neurons do not like fermentation. Neurons like aerobic respiration. So if you are without oxygen, if your brain is without oxygen for just a short period of time, you're going to have problems. Okay, because those brain cells really, really, really like oxygen because they have a lot of stuff to do. They need a lot of ATP. Okay, so remember how when we talked about muscle fibers, we said that there were things like the plasma membrane that we're now calling the sarcolemma, and the cytoplasm is now the sarcoplasm, and we're just giving funny names to all the cell parts we already knew. It happens again in the nervous system. Okay, so we're going to look at the parts of a neuron. The first part is the main cell body. So if we look at our cell, this part is the cell body. Then we're going to get to these extensions off of it. Okay, but we're starting with the cell body. You might also see the cell body referred to as the soma. Okay, that's another term for it. Okay, so that soma is the biosynthetic center. That's where we are going to be producing a lot of our stuff. It has the most active rough ER of any cell. And what does rough ER produce? It has ribosomes on it, and the ribosomes make proteins. we're making lots of proteins because neurotransmitters are proteins. Okay, so in order for us to send any information, we have to have a protein. Okay, so we're making lots of proteins. They also have no centrioles. You remember what centrioles are used for? Mitosis. And if you don't do mitosis, you don't need centrioles, right? All right. The plasma membrane of the cell body is what receives the information from other neurons. So another neuron may be sitting over here, and it will send its information here to the cell body itself. That's where we're trying to get all the information to. And then that cell body will send the information down one of its extensions. If you look at the entire nervous system, the majority of the cell bodies of all the neurons in your body are located within the central nervous system. So it may be a nerve that goes all the way down to your big toe, but the cell body of that nerve is going to be located in your spinal cord. Okay? Because we want those cell bodies protected, so we put them inside of that central nervous system where there's a lot of skeleton that's going to surround them, right? So your vertebral column supports your spinal cord, your skull supports your brain. So we want those cell bodies to be protected and hidden away. Okay? So most of the cell bodies are within the central nervous system. So in our picture over here of the spinal cord, we've got these two red dots. Those are the nuclei of these cells. And then they send their axons. They send this long extension outside of the spinal cord. Okay? But his cell body stays there in the central nervous system. Okay? Now, these next two are terms, and they get a little confusing. So if I say it one time it doesn't make sense, ask me to say it a different way. We'll make sure we get it, okay? We are going to have collections and clusters of cell bodies. Okay, so if we have inside of the spinal cord, we've got these two cell bodies right here, but there may be tons and tons of cell bodies living inside of here, sending all their extensions out the nerve. Okay? This cluster right here of cell bodies within the central nervous system is called a nuclei. Okay? Same as in your brain. If you have your brain and you're looking at it, if I have a bunch of those cell bodies collected together, that is called a nuclei. Okay, it's just a collection of cell bodies. The extensions can go all kinds of different places, but the cell bodies located together as a nuclei. Yeah?
So do the cell bodies like not move around?
Nope, they stay where they are. Good question. Yeah, these aren't very mobile cells. They just kind of find out where they are and stay there. Okay? So if it's in the central nervous system, those groups are called nuclei. However, when we get a collection of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system, so this is associated with nerves, so they're going to lie alongside of the nerves, we call these ganglia. Okay, so for example, sensory nerves that are coming into the spinal cord have their cell bodies out here in what's called the dorsal root ganglion, which is just an extension of that nerve. Okay, so the cell bodies are all grouped up here in the dorsal root ganglion, and then they send their extension into the spinal cord. Okay, so a collection of cell bodies in the central nervous system is a nuclei. Collection of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system is a ganglia. Okay? Questions? Okay. Now, we've got that cell body. Now we're going to look at the extensions. Okay? So, again, we're going to look at collections of those extensions. So first, the bundles of neuron processes, so bundles of extensions in the central nervous system is called a tract. So when you did your sheep ring dissection and you cut him straight down the middle, you cut through the corpus callosum. Okay? The corpus callosum is one of these tracts. It's a collection of axons that span between the right and left hemisphere. So it connects the two places together. Okay? So it's a tract in the central nervous system. But then bundles of processes in the peripheral nervous system is called a nerve. So a nerve is a bundle of axons that are all just grouped together. Okay? There are two types of neuron processes, dendrites and axons, and they have two different functions. We're going to get to here in a second. Okay, so we'll start with dendrites. Dendrites are highly branching. They're going to be these yellow guys over here on this side of the cell, all those extensions. Their job is to receive information. So they're receptive or input region. Okay, so they're receiving, they're getting information in. They are going to send that information to the cell body. Okay? They have a very large surface area. And the reason they have a large surface area is so they can synapse with lots of other neurons. So they're picking up signals from all over the place. They're like big ears. Okay? The signals that they send to that cell body are not action potentials yet. Okay, we're going to make action potentials later. But the information that they send to the cell body are called graded potentials. And we'll talk more about graded potentials later, but just know that that's what the dendrites are sending. Okay, and they're sending it towards the cell body. And they're short, they don't last very long. They get weaker over time. They get weaker over the distance. Okay, so those are dendrites, sending information to the cell body. Now, next is the axon. Okay, so the axon is what's making our action potential. It generates, it transmits the action potential. And it transmits it away from the cell body. So it takes all that information that the dendrites brought in, synthesizes it, and now decides, what should I do? And it sends that signal out away from the cell. Each neuron is going to have a single axon. So we said there could be many dendrites up here, but there is only one axon that comes off. Okay? If you are an extremely long axon, you can be called a nerve fiber. For instance, the nerve fiber that runs from your spinal cord to your big toe. That is a long axon. Okay, I just shut that down. Okay, that's a really long axon. So that is a nerve fiber. At the end of the axon, we saw, there we go. We saw they look kind of like that from our muscles, and then they release neurotransmitters down here. Right, does that look familiar? That looks somewhat like what is a picture of? Okay, we'll call it that. So these endings can be called synaptic knobs because they're kind of knob-like. Or, if you want to get fancy, you can call them boutons. I'm serious, guys. They're boutons. And their job is to release the neurotransmitters. Okay? Now, even though we only have one axon, it does branch here at the end. All right. So far, so good? Yeah.
So the action potential is, the axon is what causes the action.
Right. So the action potential is going to start here in the base of the axon and then get carried all the way down. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
So the branching off is like underneath your skin.
It could happen.
Like that. And then the middle part is like going into the nervous system.
So this axon, so think about it like we talked about last chapter with the muscles. Okay. So in this case, we would have a muscle fiber down here. Okay, a couple different muscle fibers. That's your motor unit. Okay. And then this axon, and then this guy. If this is skeletal muscle, this body is going to be living in the spinal cord. And then this axon is going to be part of the nerve that is running to whatever muscle it's running to. And then it will branch here when it gets out to the muscle itself. Okay? You could think of it, if you want it to be a sensory nerve, then we could say that this is in, let's see, free nerve endings were on the hair bulb. So maybe that's a hair. Does that look like a hair to you guys? Okay, so maybe there's a hair, and the free nerve endings are wrapped there around the hair. And then this is going to be a sensory nerve. Okay, and this is going to be in the dorsal root ganglion, and then that's going to go into the spinal cord. Does that help any visualizing? This guy, he's going to be close to the central nervous system. So when you're sending information out, yes. When you're sending information in, no. He's in that dorsal root ganglion that's right there beside the central nervous system. Yeah. But that goes back to what we had on this side about cell bodies, is that most of the cell bodies live there within the central nervous system. And then the extensions go out to wherever they're going to, traveling through nerves. For the dendrites? So there's always connections between the neurons. So in order for you to decide to move that muscle, you have to have a reason to move the muscle. So that reason to move the muscle, like if I decide I'm going to move this muscle and lift up my bottle, what had to happen in my brain before that happened? What do I have to do? I had to see it, so that's a sensory neuron sending information in. That had to go to some part of the memory center of my brain that said, that's a water bottle, I've seen it before. Another part of my brain that said, it's kind of full, it's going to be probably heavy, I need more force. And then another part of my brain that decides, yeah, I'd really like to drink that. So all of those neurons from those different brain regions are sending information to this guy that then says, I need to move. So all those dendrites are taking information. And cool stuff, okay. So we said we're taking information from all different places. So maybe this vision neuron, the sensory neuron from seeing says, yeah, you need to pick that up. It's going to activate that neuron, which says, I want to contract. But then maybe another part of your brain says, no, you don't really need to pick it up. This is oversimplification. But another part says you don't need to pick it up. It's going to be sending a signal through the dendrites that says, don't cause an action potential. And then another signal maybe do cause an action potential. And it's the sum of all of those that will actually decide whether the muscle is going to contract or not. Yeah.
So are the dendrites, like the branching out part, is that like how the neurons like talk to each other kind of?
Exactly. So the dendrites are the ears. They're listening for those other neurons that are going to tell me something. The axon is their mouth saying, move. Okay? It's what happens. Yeah.
So for something that's where you always need two, like, of those, do you need one that's receiving and one that's...
Yeah, so everything that happens in your nervous system is a big loop and connected. Everything's connected to everything else. Yeah. You don't just have one neuron sitting out by itself who says, I think I shall contract. I think I shall have an action potential. Yeah. Everything's connected to everything else. Yeah. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. So we had gotten to this slide, right? Okay. Myelin sheath. So I told you to put a pin in oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, but we're going to come back to them again. This is us coming back to them again. Okay, so in the central nervous system, this myelin sheath that we're getting ready to talk about is formed by oligodendrocytes. In the peripheral nervous system, this myelin sheath is formed by Schwann cells. They're going to do similar things. It just looks a little different in the different places. Okay, so what is the myelin sheath? The myelin sheath itself is a whitish, fatty, segmented sheath. Sorry. Okay, so it covers and it wraps around the axon. Okay, so it wraps this fatty only is getting information from its cell body, and it increases the speed of that nerve impulse. So we go about 150 times faster in a myelinated nerve. Okay? So here's what happens. When an action potential travels down an unmyelinated axon, it's going to go like this. Open channels, closed channels, open channels, closed channels, open channels, closed channels. And it's just going to walk slowly down that axon. When you have myelination, you have these little bits of insulation and little gaps between, which, well, they're nodes of Ranvier. They're coming next on the next slide. So now the action potential, as it travels down, he starts here, but he can start here and then jump to the next node of Ranvier, and then jump to the next node. And so you end up going a whole lot faster, 150 times faster, if you will. Okay. Now, the myelin sheath. What is it? Okay, so in the peripheral nervous system, we're formed by Schwann cells. And these Schwann cells are cells that wrap around the axon. Your book says that it wraps in a jelly roll fashion. I don't know what a jelly roll fashion is. What I like to call it is the Swiss cake roll fashion. Okay? So Little Debbie Swiss cake rolls. You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So you have your axon. And you have your Schwann cell. Okay? This Schwann cell is thin, but it still has a cytoplasm and it has a nucleus. When that Schwann cell encounters the axon, it will then start wrapping itself around like a Swiss cake roll. Okay? And it wraps, 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 until you have these multiple layers all around the axon. Okay? That is your myelin sheath. Schwann cell wrapping and wrapping and wrapping. Now, what also happens is as you're wrapping, it's like a roll of a bottle of toothpaste. As you're wrapping, you're squishing and squishing and squishing. You're squishing the cytoplasm out as you roll. So these roll layers are just plasma membranes stuck on top of each other. Until you get to this outside layer that now has all the cytoplasm in it, because all the cytoplasm was squished out of the smaller layers. Okay? So if we look at it on the end, we end up with something like this. Number one, that's the axon. Okay, so we're looking at it on the end. Number four, all these layers of wrap, we call that the myelin sheath. And that's that Schwann cell wrapped and wrapped and wrapped and wrapped around. So it's plasma membrane on plasma membrane on plasma membrane. Then the very, very outside layer, that's where the cytoplasm and the nucleus is actually left. That is called the neurolemma, that outside layer. Now, in your objectives, it says you need to know what the neurolemma is, but it's nowhere in the slides. So I added it. There it is, that bullet. Neurolemma is the nucleus and cytoplasm from the Schwann cell that bulges external to the myelin sheath. So it's that last layer. Now, you might also see the word axolemma. Axolemma is just the plasma membrane of the axon. Okay, so it's the outside of the yellow piece. Okay? There are little spaces between the Schwann cell called nodes of Ranvier. They don't touch. And to make sure we are at the same place the other class is, here's the last slide about oligodendrocytes. So oligodendrocytes do a similar thing in the central nervous system, except now one cell will reach out and wrap around multiple axons at the same time. Okay? So nodes of Ranvier are more widely spaced. In the central nervous system, if you are myelinated, you are called white matter. If you are unmyelinated, you are gray matter. So the cell bodies are not axons. They don't get wrapped up. So cell bodies are only found in gray matter. Okay? All right. That is it. That is the end. Remember to do your objectives for Friday. Bring them with you. And you are good to go. Yes. Yeah. Thank you, thank you. Notes about the egg? What are they? They are, if we go back, well,